Can I have your attention for just a minute? We have an announcement to make, so please, if you just keep her down for a second.
Hi, my name is Carla Barrett Curtis, and I'm an interpreter here tonight. Buenas noches, mi nombre es Carla Barrett Curtis y soy un intérprete. Si necesitan equipo de interpretación, gracias.
We're going to get started here in 4-ish minutes. right, folks, we're going to get started here. We do have a lot of material to go through here tonight, so we're going to start on time. So good evening. Welcome to the 7th meeting of the Middle School that better? All right. I can yell, but maybe that's not going to be as sustainable. Okay, so welcome. Welcome to the 7th meeting of the Middle School Advisory Boundary Adjustment Advisory Committee. I want to announce that the Boundary Committee meetings are being live streamed to the district's YouTube channel. A link is posted on the Middle School Boundary Adjustment webpage, and it is shared on the district's Facebook and Twitter feeds. The Advisory Committee's meetings are all public meetings, and all materials are made available through the posting of those materials on the district webpage. My name is Stephen Sparks, and I'm the Administrator for Long Range Planning for the district, and I will continue to be leading this process. We do have staff up here at the table. We have Robert McCracken to my left and Craig Beaver to my right. Mr. Beaver is the Administrator for the Transportation Department, and we were going to be having I hope a robust conversation about transportation here this evening. So as we do before or at the start of every meeting, I want to go through the meeting expectations for this project. We assume the best of intentions. We all want the best for our students. We listen intently to understand. We are open to considering new ideas. We remain open to influence, not judgmental. We will consider all options. There are no bad. Our interaction is done with respect, and we will respect the views viewpoint. So as in the past, these expectations are not only for the advisory committee, but for everyone in the room. We are all working toward solutions that will work best for the district. So before I open the meeting to the committee's discussion, I want to do the public testimony portion of the meeting. We'll be drawing randomly from cards across elementary school boundaries. So it's important that you put your elementary school boundary on the yellow card. If your name is called, you will be the one providing the testimony. We're not yielding the microphone to somebody else. If you, as an audience, want to have a single representative speak, then we're expecting that there will be a single yellow card from that attendance area. Absent that, each person who wants to speak will have an equal opportunity to have their name called. To help expedite the public testimony here this evening, we're going to stop taking the yellow testimony cards in 10 minutes. So call it 6:45 when we're going to stop taking the yellow cards. So if you want to testify, please fill out the yellow comment card and turn it in over there where you walked in. So I want to remind everyone on the objectives of our boundary adjustment. One is we're creating a new boundary for the Timberland area school. We are, 2, reducing the number of students at Stoller to approximately 90% of permanent capacity. 3, we're balancing the enrollments at the other middle schools. And 4, possible amendments to other attendance boundaries is allowed to be considered. Now this evening we're moving into the phase of the project where we're applying a lot more data to the working maps. And so I have up on the screen here the factors that are in Policy JC, our board Policy JC. You will see that one of the factors is student body composition. This factor concerns the demographic information such as race, ethnicity, socioeconomic data, which also includes free and reduced lunch data. This is about having a student body that is representative of our community. 2, the current and future availability of space in the school. We've been talking about this a lot in prior meetings about building capacity and our ability to accommodate future enrollment projections. 3, feeder patterns from elementary, middle to high school. So we have been talking about this also quite a bit, about how the boundaries will feed students to their next school. And lastly, neighborhood proximity and accessibility. And this concerns how students will access their school. So transportation data, including walkability, is used to consider these, this factor. So at the January 16th meeting, the committee identified 2 maps of the very extensive list of maps that we were looking at as test maps. And maps 8 and 9 were selected by a majority of the committee, and those are now referenced as Working Map A and Working Map B. I'll talk about each map here in a moment, but I also want to talk about, there's a third working map called Map C. Staff prepared this map in response to the committee's discussions throughout this process and requests for information about walkability. This map is not a recommendation. This map is on equal footing of maps A and B for the committee's discussion. There's been public comment that's been coming in over the webpage talking about how this map is test map 3. This is not test map 3. If there are similarities to test map 3, they are coincidental. This map was prepared by Mr. Beaver and myself to look at what are the transportation impacts of walkability and what potential boundaries could be. That's it. Okay? So, at the end of the meeting here this evening, after our discussion, I'm going to be looking for the committee to provide us direction on how they want to proceed. The proceeding could be about you'd like to see certain edits to the 3 maps. You could get rid of a map. You could say, we'd like to go back and look at a different map. The only thing that I'm asking all of you is that this is going to be a committee decision. So if Mike says, I really want to see X on map B, if the rest of the committee doesn't agree, well, sorry, Mike, we're not going to consider it. So, as we get going here, I just want to remind everybody about the microphones. Please get that microphone nice and close to you. Speak directly into the microphone. Don't mumble. Speak up. And if you want to go to the maps or to the screen, please grab the handheld mic and go to work. All right. So I have map A up on the screen, and before I turn it over to Mr. Beaver, I want to walk through the 3 maps here, pretty high level, and you can see the capacity data and the feeder data up there on the screen. So with map A, the capacities for the middle schools are reasonably well met in 2021 and 2025. And this is achieved in part by moving Summa out of Stoller and moving Rachel Carson from Five Oaks to Cedar Park. There is a substantial increase in free reduced lunch at Mountain View, which is almost at 60%. And Mr. Beaver will talk about the transportation issues that we are seeing with map A. With map B, you'll see that we have capacity issues at Meadow Park and Woodford in 2021, and we will have capacity issues at Stoller in 2025. Summa is in 4 schools, and Rachel Carson, 4 schools including Stoller and Timberland, and Rachel Carson has been moved to Cedar Park. There is a good balance of free reduced lunch across the schools. Cedar Park would have the most substantial increase, and this is largely in part to the wealthier neighborhoods north of 26 that currently go to Cedar Park, going to largely to Timberland. So that's what's going on in that map. There are some difficult middle school to high school feeders at Meadow and Highland. And let me move on to C. C, as I said, this is a map that we prepared focusing on the walk zones around the middle schools. The capacities are reasonably well met in both 2021 and 25. Stoller exceeds its permit capacity by approximately 70 students in 2025. 4 schools will have SUMA in this analysis. That includes Stoller and Timberland. And then Rachel Carson would be moved to Whitford in this case. There is a decent balancing of free reduced lunch across the schools. The most impactful socioeconomic addition to Timberland is in Map C, and Stoller remains about the same in the socioeconomic percentages. There are 2 3-way middle school to high school splits. So at Highland, there's a 3-way split in order to accommodate the Chehalem walkers, and specifically that is this area right here that would go to Beaverton High School, but they could walk to Highland from that location. The other splits are at Meadow, and I've identified those in our staff memorandum, and that is they're highlighted here in the broad or the boulder lining, but you've got a Aloha boundary over here, you have Beaverton boundary here, and then you have Sunset, and then you have Westview. So we did identify as part of this a possibility of, and it's for discussion purposes only, of moving the high school boundaries for Aloha Beaverton. So in this area, moving it to Murray Boulevard, and then this part of Oak Park, or Oak Hills rather, moving it entirely, and it would go to Sunset as part of the high school feed. So here are the percentages for capacity in the 3 maps. You can see that we do exceed in a few areas through here of varying degrees. And here are the feeder patterns of those working maps. So at this point, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Mr. Beaver to walk you through the transportation analysis that we have provided you this evening. And we're going to start with the page that looks like this. And Mr. Beaver, please take it away.
Hi, thanks. Okay, so if we'll start on map A. And I'd also, for a visual, have you take a look at the transportation analysis. It's got the call outs on it. That's pretty helpful as well. And it's pretty straightforward. I spoke about this 2 weeks ago, briefly, but the walkability issue is a tremendous issue. We, as a school district, we have a responsibility to be good stewards of public funds, and not taking advantage of the available safe walking areas to schools is questionable. And the reason I bring that up and start with that is in map A, as you can see, the first thing that leaps out at us is the Stoller area. It's taking a sizable portion of what is now currently a safe, walkable area and busing those students. The same thing at Mountain View. Again, a very sizable area. Robert, did we put down the, we didn't put down the number of kids, right? One second. Yeah. I have it. Here we go. So, for example, in map A for Stoller, we have 364 kids that are walking out of 869. But Robert's going to pull up something up for you. I don't want to start talking about something that you can't see. But anyway, there's a sizable amount of kids, both at Stoller and Mountain View, that is extremely concerning. We're taking kids that already have it, are already walking now, and putting them on the bus. That's going to call for more resources on our part, higher cost, and most problematic for me is just hiring the bodies to do it. As I spoke about 2 weeks ago, we're in a great economy, very low unemployment rate, although we offer a very competitive wage and benefit package. We are still to fill our positions, so it's a very real thing. So those are the two biggest things that come out. Some of the other things that, again, that are very, that are problematic for us. If we look at the Timberland area, we have the fund at Timberland that Meadow Park surrounds, and it happens a couple other places too. Driving through one boundary to picking up kids on one route where we pick up on the north side, and then we have to drive through another boundary and pick up kids on the south side. It's problematic for us. It doesn't make good routing sense. It doesn't make good engineering sense. All our routes are based on a kind of a spoke method, especially up north where we may have some very high concentration of kids at a single stop. For for middle school, our guideline is about 60, about 2.5 kids per seat. So it comes out to about 62, 63 kids is what our goal is, what we shoot for. So it's very possible we can pick up 40 kids at one stop at some of the stops up north. And so we have to travel down as we're coming down, traveling south, and some of those areas are not quite as populated or a little bit older that don't have as much new development. We may have stops that only have 2 or 3 kids at it. So we're able to maximize our efficiency on those routes and pick up those stops that may be a mile or 2 away as we drive south and pick those up. So when we start to have islands and peninsulas, that puts a damper on what we can do. So those are concerns for us as well. Another thing that right now we live with, what we like to minimize at all possible, is the number of times we have to cross a railroad tracks. State law requires, whether we have kids on the bus or not, we have to come to a full stop, plan our stopping break, lights, open the doors, stop, look, listen, quiet everything. And that takes time. If you've ever been behind a school bus crossing TV Highway, you know what I'm talking about. So we'd like to, the number of times we have to go back and forth across those railroad tracks. The trolley is the same thing, but those major railroad tracks or something. So again, map A isn't real good for us there as well. And then again, we have the potential to expand some walking zones, as you can see down in the Conestoga area, that we aren't able to take advantage of. As has been published before, I believe either this week, I think it was this one, our walking guidelines, and I talked about them last time, which were 3 lanes, 30 miles per hour, 4 lanes, 35 miles per hour, and 5 lanes at 35 miles per hour, depending with crossing guards and all that. So, going east and west on Murray's a 40 mile per hour street. We're not going to cross Murray. You know, there's several streets that we're not going to cross because of the speed limit. And as we'll see in a few minutes here, we start talking about a couple of the other maps. Believe it or not, Allen is a 35 mile per hour street, and we do cross Allen now. We cross Allen with elementary kids. We put a controlled intersection with a crossing guard, and we're able to do that. So, as we'll see in a few minutes here on another map, we would be able to take advantage of increasing some walk zones. But again, map A doesn't give us that. So, at that point, I'd like to offer any questions for you. One thing I will point out is you look at it, the number of routes has gone down, and that's simply a matter of mathematics. We're dividing by 9 instead of dividing by 8, so the number is going to go down. So we went from 99 routes to 95 routes. The number is going to go down. But what I'd like to draw your attention to is the number of students riding. We're going from about 5,400 kids now. Map A puts us at 5,754. That's a tremendous increase and a big impact on kids. And in our opinion, that isn't the right thing to do. Putting more kids on the bus is not the right thing to do, especially when we have these walking areas that we can take advantage of, and we can severely reduce that. And then you can see the operational costs as well. Again, costs go down slightly, but as you can see, they continue to fall. But what I said about the walking zones is the biggest thing, and 5,700 kids from 5,300 is not something that we would support. Got your questions or move on? Okay, so if we can go to map B, draw your attention to map B, please. Map B does a little bit better job of reducing the number of routes. We go from 99 routes down to 92 routes. We can see Highland Park, it takes a big drop from 11 routes down to 5 routes. There's a significant change in Highland Park, and a significant change in Cedar Park, as you can see. But again, looking at the number of kids, we're at almost 50, about 5,400. We're still doing 5,600 kids, 200 additional kids, and we still have the same problems about walkability at the stroller area. And now we're talking on both sides of the stroller area, the east and the west side of the stroller area. And these are safe walkable paths that we're using now. We have the same problem with what I euphemistically call the peninsula at Timberland and Meadow Park. This map does a good job with limiting our crossing of railroad tracks. I will say that. And again, going back to the Mountain View area, while it looks like it's definitely that area down there from Mountain View that goes into Highland Park, that definitely is within a mile and a half, there's no question, but we can't cross Murray. And that's a significant amount of kids. All those kids that live there now currently walk to Mountain View. So that's a significant hit to that one. We do gain a little bit on the northern part of Highland Park there. Above Allen, we pick up some area there that we can cross. And then again, I would point out to you down at the Conestoga area, we have an area potentially down there that we could use for, we could add to a walkability area as well. As far as the Mountain View, the other part of Mountain View, however, the north-south, that's something that's very good for us. 175th Street. Going north and south, actually, in most cases, is a lot easier for us than to go east and west. It really is. I know that, and I'll address it now, with respect to Five Oaks and Stoller, making the north-south travel across the 26 freeway. What I can tell you is we do it somewhere between 27 and 35 times a day right now. It's not an impact for us. I know that in people, and we saw this in other boundary measures, driving in your car is one thing, driving in a school bus is something different. It doesn't impact us now, and we don't expect it to have any impact in the future. At the most, I would say that it might make a 20-minute ride a 22-minute ride. but it's not a significant impact, and that's the point I want to make. I'm not going to say it's not going to, driving from Springville Road to Five Oaks isn't a longer ride. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that. What I will tell you, though, it's not a significant impact. At some point, we've offered up the data, and I think our overall average ride is about 25 minutes, 23 to 25 minutes. The data that I've given you, I've pulled out what the children that fall under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Act. We've pulled those out of the data because they would skew it they would skew that. We've also pulled out some of the option kids as well. For example, we're talking about Springville kids. We have Springville kids that live down by Vose. Those kids travel a long time on the bus, but that's what it is. So the data pulls that out to try and make it apples to apples. And so when I say it's about a 22 to 25 minute ride, that's what we're talking about. It doesn't take into account those one-offs and two-offs, those kinds of things. So the other thing I would bring you to is then to map C. And as Steve said, this is by no means any kind of recommendation, any kind of push on our part, but we wanted to see what does it look like if we maximize the walking areas that we currently have, and that's kind of what it is, and that's what you get. And as you can see, it's a fairly significant drop, 99 to 85 routes, but more importantly, we actually reduced the overall number of students that we're transporting today from nearly 5,400 down to 5,200. So we have about a 280, 200 student drop, which is a good thing. And then it is overall less expensive to do that. It does take advantage of the walking areas, as we talked about. It kind of maintains what we're doing with the railroad tracks. Unfortunately, I do still have we're not excited about the peninsula for Stoller, which at the north that crosses over that Five Oaks. Again, it's the same thing, especially way up there at the top. So the folks that live up in that area, they know. I know off the top of my head, we have 2 or 3 stops. It's one stop fills up the bus. Seriously, there's 60 kids that could potentially get on one stop up there, and it's continuing to grow. So we're going to be adding assets to that as time goes on. And again, that's a perfect example of where we would get the bus at 3/4 capacity, and then drop down and pick up on the way down. And there's some very good north-south lanes of travel there. 35 miles per hour, it moves fairly well, not a lot of signals, and that's why I talk about moving north to south. So personally, I would like to see something addressed on the peninsula there a little bit more. That would help us. But again, the biggest thing here, the other thing again, if y'all draw your attention over to...
Before you move on, can you, are you saying this right up here is the peninsula?
Yeah, that's my peninsula. I'd like to draw your attention down to Highland Park, and this one actually opens up a walk zone above Allen Boulevard, because Allen Boulevard is 35 miles per hour. Currently, that doesn't belong to Highland Park, that area. We could, by moving it in there, we can open that, and we can actually increase the number of walkers there, and save some money as well there. Again, maintains that good north-south 175th up there, and again, we get 175th Kemmer, Weir, all that is integrated. All that really, we needed that to really stay with the same school, because you know there's nowhere to turn around. You've got to go, and if you're going to do it, you need to keep all that area together, because you have to go, and for us to be able to go down and turn around and come back, we can't just flip in, because most of those streets that offshoot off of that are dead ends and things like that. You have to go up and down the hill. And the other thing, it maintains continuity in terms of inclement weather. Right now, we are going to be revisiting our inclement weather policy, and to where when we, in taking a look, I'm not saying we're doing this yet, but taking a look so that we can see if we can isolate it by area. So if Cooper Mountain's in terrible shape, maybe we don't have to also call it for Thompson Road or that kind of area up in the north area. So right now we don't have that capability, and we're looking to work on that. So again, it's important to keep those areas together so that we're not affecting more than one school. Yeah.
Okay. Between Craig and I, we have taken a half an hour of the meeting. So what I want to do now is turn it over to the committee to start asking questions, having a dialogue. As we have done in the past, Monica is showing us how. Put your name tent up on its end so we know who to call on. So Monica, kick us off.
So thanks for the transportation information. It's very important. One thing that I think we'd like to see is travel times for all of these scenarios. That's one piece that I think we've talked about throughout the process, and how these changes impact travel times for the kids, but not just the mean travel time. I think we should look at some sort of outlier stat, like standard deviation or range or something, so that we understand, like, the kids that are on the extremes, how we can best adjust for those guys, the ones that are further out.
Okay. That's an excellent observation. Here's with travel times, and that's why if you notice they're not on there. Routing is, since we have 4 tiers between option schools and the 3 levels of schools we have 4 tiers and 4 start times. The routing itself, what these hours and numbers and everything is based on, is from the point of first pickup to delivery at the school, and point of delivery at the school to the last pickup. And it has to be that way in order to make apples to apples, because routing depends, a lot of it depends on where is that bus coming from. So what elementary school does that bus finish at in order to go to start the next route? And without routing, essentially without routing 26,000 kids, I can't accurately answer that. And that's why. And I wish I could, but it's just, we've started working on our fall routing right now, if that gives you any idea. Okay, so that's a great idea. I'd love to do it, but realistically, that's not something we're going to be able to do, because it's dependent on so many other things. And the only other thing I throw out with the outliers is, number one, especially the option schools, when those folks sign on, they sign on with the understanding that they are going to probably get treated a little differently if they live in a certain area. And then the students that qualify for the McKinney-Vento law, that's such a transient population. It may be there a week, it may be there a month, and then it's gone. So to account for that in any way is just, it's next to impossible. So I hope that answers that.
Jason.
Craig, I want to thank you and Steve and Robert for assembling all of this data. I know this is a lot of work. And Stephen, I'm been in continual reminder with myself of your opening remarks every meeting about assuming good intentions. I've continually tried to remind myself that. I hope that comes across in these next comments. But I am troubled by the data that's being provided to us, the data that's not being provided to us, and how it impacts what I consider to be a balanced measure of the 4 factors of policy JC. As I look at it, policy JC is frustratingly non-prescriptive. Proximity, it doesn't say which way to look at it. As somebody who's lobbied in its last revision to have it clarified and been disappointed it didn't happen the way I wanted, yeah, I noticed it didn't happen in either direction. And yet we are given data on one aspect of it. I mean, you describe yourself, Stephen, as saying we're going to hear about walkability. We've seen a whole map produced specifically about walkability, calling out the walkable zones where there's opportunities. But we are certainly hearing from the community who's also worried about long commutes. And we're not calling that out. You know, I've asked for the start from just different ways we can just calculate basic door-to-door transportation times, and we don't have it. I don't feel like we can't properly evaluate both of it. I'll note that in the revision of policy JC that happened since the high school boundary, and I believe even since the elementary school process, transportation costs have been specifically called out before as a secondary factor separate from proximity. It's no longer there. Now, I certainly feel personally it's quite reasonable to consider it as part of an aspect of proximity. But again, it's one aspect of it. I will note with some frustration. I mean, at the last meeting, we had two committee members voice their opinion on the side of saying, hey, they viewed walkability as a privilege. I believe that's objectively a fact when you consider the number of people who are in a walkable zone versus not. It's not a value judgment on either side. It's just saying, hey, far fewer people can. Inadvertently, I'm sure, those comments were almost immediately shut down by two staff members who chimed in on transportation costs with the implication that every dollar we didn't save was going to be taken away from putting teachers in classrooms. My history on this goes back more than 4 years. You'll remember I advocated for a number of different assignments as part of the high school process that had a number of advantages in relation to policy JC, including greatly reduced transportation costs. They weren't taken up then. It's been 4 years since then. The enrollment numbers have made them increasingly possible because we've had a flat and expected to be declining enrollment. We've had 8-digit budget cuts on average every single year, and I didn't hear the same. I've never heard the suggestion, but we've got to go back and revisit that because we need to save every dollar we can. To hear it now and hear almost it put to this committee that if we don't adopt a focus that completely accommodates walkability, that we're responsible for those cuts seems inconsistent at best. I've got another couple of things here. It would make a ton of sense if the district had a policy that mandated us to maximize the impact on the transportation budget. We don't have that. And that's I believe, where that fight should be taken. We're left with a policy that requires us to look at both sides of it and find a balance. The map C, I see as one end zone, since we're coming up on the Super Bowl. A few meetings back, we had a map 4 that was nearly at the other end of the end zone. My belief is that given the diversity of opinion we hear in the community on their interest on which side of how do you interpret proximity, and given that there's nothing prescriptive in the policy, we need to find something in the middle. I will spare everyone right now the comments. I have similar concerns around our focus on middle to high school splits. That is 1/3 of that particular factor. We're getting a scorecard with every map, noting those changes. We're not noting the others. And in many maps, I see us almost gleefully adding elementary school splits for the sake of other factors. And that's not a balanced approach. I think our work now is to look across all 4 factors, all aspects of it on both sides, and balance them.
Thank you. Mike.
Craig, thank you for your work on this. I know that it takes quite a bit of time to put all this together. Appreciate it. I'm going to take this in a completely different direction here. I noticed all 3 maps, working maps we have before us tonight, proposed Rachel Carson going different school, currently in Houston, 5 Oaks. 2 of the maps have Cedar Park and one has Whitford. I'm wondering if we could have some input perhaps from the district personnel as to what impact it may have for Rachel Carson.
I would be happy if somebody can answer that, because this is out of my brain. I am going to look at So Brian, do you want to take this?
Keep it away. So we currently at Woodford have a SUMA program of 90 kids. We also have a dual language program of about 140 kids. And I believe Rachel Carson has about 180 kids. It makes it extremely difficult to staff a building appropriately, depending on what time starts are. It raises my blood pressure a little bit to hear 3 different groups plus regular Whitford being all at one school. I know that a few years ago, Park had similar 3 different programs, and it's very difficult to staff, especially with bilingual. So that's how it would impact us. You're just dealing with lots of different programs. We to be challenging.
Okay, sorry. So we currently have SUMA at just 8th grade, and the plan is that it's out next. So the grade level, or a middle level, but in losing some of our students, it looks like that is likely to happen at Cedar Park. It would make room for 180 Rachel Carson students. One of the ways Park and our staff that we are an MYP, and that is very much an inquiry-based approach to Rachel Park currently in. That's absorbed, much more discussion further ahead, but the way we teach very closely aligns with the way Rachel Carson teachers teach. I'm going to turn it off, Shirley.
So my understanding is that as we look at the boundary changes, it's a capacity problem. And so my understanding is that depending on how many students come from other schools, which additional elementary schools or how that's all done, it's about whether we can house the 180 Rachel Carson students. That being said, we've got this gorgeous garden that they access all the time. So I would be concerned, on a personal, selfish level, I would be concerned about the hard work they've put in there, that they wouldn't be housed in the same building as where the garden, the beautiful garden that everybody needs to go by and see, that they've worked on so hard.
What I can add, I don't have a lot on Rachel Carson, but I just did something. And we're carrying 113 kids in the morning and 168 children in the afternoon just from Rachel Carson. Those kids are coming in on option buses with the high school kids and then transferring out and going to their schools, and then the flip-flop, they're going back to their high schools. They're picked up early and then shuttled to their high schools, their home high school area to go. But so that's the number right now: 113 in the morning, 168 in the afternoon.
All right, Mike, did you have anything else? Okay. John, you were next.
Thanks, Stephen. And also, again, thank you, Craig, Stephen, Robert, and the whole staff for continuing to pull together all the data. I know it's a lot of work. I did want to touch on 4 points I saw in the comments from the public today, and then just have one question. Just very briefly, we asked about walking versus splitting in elementary school, what the community would prefer. We received 355 public comments today from the past couple of days. It looked to me, as I looked through them, the folks from Findlay preferred primarily to stay together as a small community rather than be split for walkability. If I had to get my sense of the comments, there was a little bit both ways, but that's kind of what I saw. Second, a lot of comments about transportation costs, so really appreciate the insight today, Craig. And I'll just defer to a lot of Jason's comments in terms of, I do get a sense that it should not be our primary focus, but it is an important, an incredibly important focus because I know that there are budget constraints. So we should continue to think about that. And then a lot of comments about the similarities of 8 and 9 versus choosing a map like 3. So I just want to let you know when I thought about that choice, I wanted to really get focused at this point. So I chose what I thought were the very best 2 maps versus 2 diverse maps to pair against each other. So I'm hoping at this point we can get really focused on 2 very similar maps that I think are getting us close and work to solve the problems that Craig and others are pointing out. Some of the things that we pointed out that might be new is the conversations around Terra Linda and Rock Creek that are different now because of 8 and 9 and some of the transportation costs. So I'd really like us to focus on 8 and 9 and really look to see how can we answer some of the outstanding questions based on very similar maps that the committee chose. And since we do have map C in our hands, I will ask one question. And that is, I noticed that you decided to split Shoals Heights, and I don't know, I can't quite figure out why we would do that, particularly because it looks like Highland Park would still be with open capacity, as would Conestoga, so I'm not sure why we'd choose to split Shoals Heights.
Sorry, I'm trying to get used to this wireless, or this small thing, lapel microphone. I'll defer to Mr. Beaver here, but it was largely chosen because of bus routing. It's easier to turn right on south of Shoals Ferry Road and then be able to turn left at the signals on Loon and I'm forgetting the one on top of the hill. But that's what we were looking at. Okay, Charisse.
I also want to say thank you to Mr. Beaver for putting all this together. I'm sure it was quite a bit of work, so thank you for that. And really just to echo and piggyback on the comments made by John and Jason, I do think there's more data that we need to see, but I also think as a committee, we haven't really come together to decide what our priorities are going to be as we look at these maps. And so I frankly would like to discuss that today versus the specific maps so that we can put what we want as a committee into those views so that we can narrow these things down. Second thing, Stephen, I know that you spoke at some of the Southern PTAs, the rest of them, throughout this month, and I was wondering if you had any more feedback regarding parental comment from the Southern schools.
So I have been to a few more schools. I was at Cooper Mountain last night, or sometime this week. I think it was Tuesday. In that particular meeting, it was trying to understand the difference between Highland and Cooper Mountain. It was, yes, wanting to go together as one school. We've received a couple of comments in the past day or two that you'll see next week from them. It was a lot of good questions, but not so much, this is what, we want. I'm trying to remember the other PTOs I've been to, but generally speaking, it's more about being sure that parents are aware of this process and potential changes that may influence the middle school that they're going to, not so much changes to their specific elementary school. But feeder patterns, depending on choices made by the advisory committee, may influence where those kids go. So I know we've been getting more comments from the South, so that's been good. Okay, Michelle.
Can we settle on the number of SUMA programs that is ideal? I know we seems like we've seen 2, 3, or 4. Would it be helpful? I think it would be helpful if we knew exactly how many we were targeting for. Based on Mr. Struckmeyer's comments last week, it sounds to me like 3 to get the right number. Can we confirm?
So I would have to look at principals here who could answer that, or Dr. Franco, maybe he will, or Dr. Mead can, but let's go ahead.
Test. Come on.
Gee, many.
Here we go. Oh, sorry. Test. All right. There we go. All right. Is there an ideal number? At one point in time, we had forget it. So at one point in time, we had 4 various programs of SUMA throughout the district. We originated about 15 years ago. They were located at Whitford and at Meadow Park. So we had 2 across the district. We had a north location and a south location. It was not driven based on where students lived. It was based on, we hit a number, and students were bused to then whichever school they were allocated to. It then expanded during my time when I was deputy superintendent in teaching and learning, and we expanded. It was then expanded to Highland, at Cedar Park, and Stoller. Stoller made sense simply because we had so many students within that area. So we had 5 actually at that point in time. Since that time and the testing changed a little bit, our numbers dropped. So it's really driven by numbers. What we're seeing is an incline in the SUMA students across the district as well right now. So you can say 3 or you can say 4, but the fact of the matter is that is ultimately a decision of the Department of Teaching and Learning based on student numbers within that program. So you can say if you want to land at 3, you can land at 3, but it will be driven by numbers, and we're in the process of testing students now. So that's a difficult thing to actually just simply say a certain number. And we did go to 5 total at one point in time because we had the number of students to be able to support those programs, and it was locality to where they lived too. So.
Okay. Abhijit.
Oh, can I ask
Sure.
a question? Sorry. My other question was, are there any high schools that are currently overcrowded or under-enrolled, so we know that like some we just can't touch at all?
So Westview is over-enrolled, has been. Sunset is right around the full enrollment, and the other high schools have capacity.
So same comment, thank you Mr. Weaver for all the transportation data. When I look at that, all 3 maps are saving cost to the department in terms of transportation, total expenditure goes down. And after listening to the analysis, I did not see any showstopper issue, not something that will prevent us from implementing any map. Of course, there are problems, and we are not